Good morning. Today we're going to talk about corporate level strategy. If you recall, we've talked about building your foundation through your SWOT analysis, and then we are flipping the SWOT analysis into a TOES analysis so that we can look at making recommendations for overcoming threats, taking advantage of opportunities, using the company's strengths, and shoring up its weaknesses. Last week we looked at business level strategy, and today we're going to look at corporate level strategy. And the simplest way to think about this is the question that's being asked is, what business should a corporation compete in? That's really the one we're going to focus on. In other words, looking at your strengths, looking at the trends in the external environment, are you in fact in the right business, or should you be diversifying into other businesses? There are a lot of different ways to diversify, and we're going to talk about these during the course of this quick lecture. Obviously, the one that's most exciting to people and gets most people's attention is mergers and acquisitions. People like to buy stuff and get bigger. But there's other ways: strategic alliances, joint ventures, and corporate entrepreneurship or internal development. And basically the idea is that and when I talk about diversification, it doesn't just mean acquiring another company. It can be as simple as introducing a new product line or a new product, depending on what business you're in. You'll go back to our value chain when you think about diversification. A company can diversify into related businesses. And businesses that we're talking about here, the benefits derive from the horizontal relationship. So if you think about back to your value chain and back to the primary activities of the value chain, those are the horizontal relationship builders. And so the idea here is that you diversify by partnering up with or buying and acquiring or merging with companies like you, where you can share production facilities, distribution channels. You may have marketing overlap. Examples of this are, when a car company buys another car company, for example, or years ago when what used to be LodgeNet bought their main competitor out of Denver. Companies, Raven Industries, films division, bought their primary competitor out of Brookings. Those are companies that look and do pretty much the same things we do. We're just trying to get bigger and share some resources. Now, you can also diversify by getting into an unrelated business, and this is where you really rely on your corporate strength. And so if you think about the support activities, procurement, general administration, HR, where you are bringing those skills to an acquisition. And this is where the company that you're buying may be in a totally different business, have a totally different approach, but you have resources that you can bring to bear. Some of you in developing your metrics rightly looked at corporate level metrics, and sometimes if your corporate level metrics are excellent, then that's an indication that diversifying into unrelated businesses may be appropriate. So related diversification basically allows a firm to benefit from building off of the horizontal relationships or the primary functions in the value chain. One of the ways that you do this is if you buy a company that looks like you get bigger. Well, when you get bigger, you are able to, if you think about the Porter's Five Forces analysis, you have more negotiating power with your suppliers and your buyers. You effectively take a competitor out of the marketplace, for example. Another way that you can benefit from a related diversification is through economies of scope. And what that means is that well, I'll give you a specific example on a project I'm working on. Endeavor, which is a major oil company, just got bought by Marathon, which is another major oil company. And they are geographically actually pretty well suited because Marathon's on the East Coast and Endeavor's on the West Coast. But in listening to the CEO talk about it, he said, well, we're going to get a lot of cost savings because we don't need two marketing departments. We don't need two risk management departments. We don't need two customer service departments. And so over time, they're going to try to develop economies of scope by merging um, their organizations into a single unit. The downside of that potentially, or the upside theoretically, is that your market, one market plus one market is two markets, and you are able to serve those two markets with less overhead. The downside is that's not always true. Um, uh, Core competency is also one that you can build on, where you have uh, a company that you acquire or merge with or diversify with has particular core competencies that you can then spread across the entire organization, the new organization. In particular, if you're looking to acquire a company or merge with a company that has a particularly unique capability in a particular function, that can be another way to overcome the competitive environment. When you look at your value chain and you look at the strengths and weaknesses, and for instance, if you have a weakness in marketing, you may look for a company similar to you that has a strength in marketing and acquire them to develop economies of scope, but also to improve that function, which is not strong. Um, and this is sort of talking about the economies of scope and the ability um, through merging the two, if you will, the two primary functions, the value chain functions, then you get elimination of jobs, of facilities, and related expenses through economies of scale. And hopefully, you are able to achieve revenue enhancements through increased differentiation and sales growth. Market power and pooled negotiating power gives you the ability to be stronger in the context of the competitive environment. And another thing to look at is sometimes you want to look at diversification through vertical integration. In other words, you may want to acquire a company that is a supplier of yours or a distributor of yours. When I first got to Raven Industries many years ago, we bought GPS units for our machines, for our terminals from a company in Texas. And they were making very good money off of Raven. And so at one point, Raven decided to lock up that supply, and they actually bought the company in Texas. That's an example of related diversification through and vertical integration. Um, there are other examples of that are not directly, in a way, related diversification. For example, sometimes some of these organic food companies like Whole Foods and some others are worried so much about their supplier power, or their lack of supply, enough supply for them, that they are in fact either joint venturing with or buying up farms that do that kind of work. Um, one of the things about vertical integration where you can try to save money is there are a lot of hidden costs in every transaction that the company does. And you don't think about them all the time. But every time you pick up the phone to place an order, every time you monitor a supplier, or you write a contract, or you enforce anything, there are a lot of costs that go with it. And so when you decide to bring that internally, theoretically, you have the opportunity to get rid of significant costs. Um, Unrelated diversification is different. Unrelated diversification basically enables a firm to benefit from its, I call it support functions, but the vertical relationships that come from corporate down to the individual business units. If you have superior management and you can do corporate parenting, sometimes if you have assets and you're looking to acquire somebody who's not doing very well, you can bring your management strength and financial strength to restructure a company that is basically failing. Parenting allows the corporate office to create value through management expertise and competent central functions. So again, if you think back to your value chain and those support functions, those are the central functions that they're talking about here. And this allows a company to acquire companies not like it, but to bring corporate expertise, if you will, to that world. For example, we talked earlier about Walmart buying a health insurance company. Well, that would be an area where there's some related diversification because I think Walmart is hoping to distribute the health insurance through its stores, but they're hoping that their corporate parenting and their ability to buy in bulk and their ability to manage large organizations is what will hopefully bring them value as well as synergy. Risk reduction is another example. It's actually a goal of diversification. General Electric is a classic example of a company that has long used its corporate, what was viewed as corporate strength in those primary or support functions of the value chain. And they are in all sorts of different businesses, as you can see here. Those businesses are all unrelated to each other, but General Electric runs them. It's in the old days we called them a conglomerate, and that's what this really is about. Raven Industries here locally is a little bit like this. They have 3 or 4 divisions, all of which do very different things. And those divisions don't work together very much, and they're really run as a mini conglomerate, if you will. The Ag division, the Films division, and their Aerostar division all run separately. So basically, just to summarize, when you look at diversification, again, you want to go back to think about, why am I doing this? Are there opportunities that I need to take advantage of? Are there threats that I need to fend off? Are there weaknesses that I need to shore up? And you can think about, buying a company that is your competitor to get bigger and get economies of scope and scale. That will help you with the Porter's competitive industry or competitive environment assessment if you're having issues. You can buy a supplier or a distributor so that you can vertically integrate through your supply chain, or you may choose to enter a new business and acquire a company that offers something totally different than what you do in order to diversify on the strength of hopefully your corporate management. There's a number of different ways to diversify: mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliances, and internal development through corporate entrepreneurship and new ventures. Mergers generally involve a combination of 2 firms to form a new legal entity. Acquisitions involve one buying another. The mergers are actually fairly rare. Usually what you have are acquisitions. Unfortunately, a lot of times, mergers and acquisitions are done not for the greatest motives. Into high-tech businesses, the good motives, if you will, a lot of times it's faster to acquire than build. A lot of smaller companies you'll see will say that their intent is to get big enough so that somebody will buy them, because when they look at the competitive environment, they'll get to market much quicker getting acquired or acquiring someone rather than trying to build it internally. In other words, an acquisition is faster than corporate entrepreneurship. It also can help a company obtain valuable resources, whether it's money or assets or patents or hard facilities. And again, these are all things that one has to look at. And the idea is to use these mergers and acquisitions as a way to take advantage of threats and or opportunities to fend off threats, and also to go back and shore up weaknesses and enhance your strengths. Corporations can enter new market segments by way of acquisitions. Like we talked, if you are interested, Dell Computer a few years back decided they needed to diversify, so they bought a major IT consulting company. That then the idea was that the synergy was that they would recommend using Dell computers, but the idea was that Dell didn't do very much internal development, and that was the best way for them to acquire, to diversify, was through acquisition of a company that allowed them to get into a new market segment. A lot of limitations. There are the costs. You have to pay a lot to buy a good company. A lot of times managers' egos get in the way. And a lot of times, and you can read if you Google failed acquisitions, the companies just don't mesh. A lot of American and Japanese joint ventures have failed for that reason. Daimler Chrysler, Daimler-Benz bought Chrysler in the United States, and the acquisition really failed because the Germans and the Americans simply couldn't manage together. So there's a lot of cultural issues there as well. Now, another part of strategic management is not just buying, but also selling. And so a lot of times you'll see companies getting rid of stuff. And so when you read in the paper about a company selling a division or selling itself, a lot of times it's because they have to, or that acquisition failed and it's time to move on. And so uh, when you're observing and making recommendations for your company, one of the things you may want to keep an eye out is for underperforming assets or underperforming divisions that you may recommend that the company get rid of. Um, you really have to be pretty objective and not very emotional. People get attached to stuff. Timing is important. The value of the business you're selling is important. There's just a lot of uh, sorry about that. There's a lot of issues that come up when you're selling a business. Um, you have to communicate. It's a real process. You have to make up a whole story about the deal, both for your shareholders and for the public. Um, Again, divestment is a big deal. It takes a lot of time, and it's something that, again, from a strategic standpoint, may make a lot of sense if you have a division that, even if it's profitable, but it's taking away or distracting the company from its main business areas. Another way to diversify is through strategic alliances and joint ventures. Um, this is an area where you don't give up your own company, but you get together with another company and you either partner through a strategic alliance, or you joint venture, where you are actually forming a new entity, the two of you, with the idea that that new entity will go off and do things that are basically diversifying your corporate portfolio. Like mergers and acquisitions, you want to do these for the right reasons. There can be cultural issues. I often tell people that when you're looking at doing a joint venture or an acquisition, it's much better to start with a strategic partnership, or even just a supply or a supply agreement or a service agreement, to see if everybody gets along. Because if you can't work with people in a partnership like a strategic alliance or a supply agreement, you may not want to jump all the way to getting married in a joint venture or even an acquisition. So that's another approach. And again, if you think about it, for you may want to partner with a company that can distribute your products better than you can, or you may want to partner with a company that has particular technology that they've developed that you could use in your products. Those are things that would come under the veil of strategic alliances or even potentially a joint venture. You have to have the proper partner. You want to make sure that the two partners bring unique strengths and unique capabilities to the partnership in order to create synergy. And like I've said, it's important that partners trust each other. I get in trouble sometimes for saying this, but getting into bed with a strategic partner or a joint venture is like getting married. And you really probably ought to date first. And it's a huge commitment. I mean, it is a big deal for a company to commit to something like this. So, and it can be very costly to unwind if it doesn't work. Now, the last way to do this is through internal development or corporate entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about that, next week. But new venture, internal development, where you basically just do this on your own. It's kind of like a make or buy decision. So, and what I mean by that is that if you look again at a weakness that you need to fix or a product that you need to develop, there's always a couple of ways to do it. One is to go buy somebody who's already offering that product, potentially repackage or rebrand it, or you can do it internally. You don't have to worry about alliance partners. You don't need to merge corporate cultures. You just do it internally. And the main reason that people don't do that is that it's time consuming. It usually takes a while, and maybe by the time you realize you need to do it, it's too late and you really would be better off partnering up. Also, you do need to constantly be adding new capabilities if you're going to try to do everything internally. And finally, it's really important, I think, as a manager, but as a company, that whatever diversification you're doing it for the right reasons. That is, that you're not doing it for the manager's own prestige. Sometimes managers' bonuses are tied to the size of the company, and that tends to lead to a desire to do acquisitions. It somehow feeds people's ego. So it's very important to make sure that you're doing things for the right reason, not just to get bigger and not just to stroke somebody's ego. So just to finalize this, make sure that you try whatever corporate strategies you recommend, try to make sure that you tie them back to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and that they allow you to take advantage of an opportunity, overcome a threat, take advantage of your strengths, and improve your weakness. Okay, we'll be talking soon.